The air smelled like fresh bread and floor cleaner. It was a quiet Saturday evening in Ulst, Belgium, December 9th, 1985. Christmas decorations hung from the ceiling of the Delhaize supermarket, twinkling just above the shelves. Families strolled the aisles, picking out dinner and last-minute gifts. Among them was 9-year-old David, tagging along with his parents like any other weekend. If anything, he was probably bored the way most kids are in a grocery store, asking for treats they can't have, forced to wait in a seemingly endless line. David had no idea his life was about to change forever. It began with an explosion of sound. Not a bang, a thunderclap. The glass at the front of the store shattered in an instant. Panic spread through the store like wildfire. Screams echoed. People dropped their baskets and ran for cover. 3 men dressed in black, armed with shotguns and assault rifles, walked in without saying a word, shooting anyone who moved. David and his father tried to hide behind a freezer near the butcher's section. He still remembers the way his father covered him with his own body and how cold the floor felt against his cheek. Moments later, his father was dead, shot at point-blank range. David survived, barely. 4 others were killed that day. But why? And by whom? The attack that claimed the life of David's father was only the final act in a shocking killing spree that terrorized Belgium for over 2 years. The attackers vanished into the night, never to be seen again. No fingerprints, no clear motive, no arrests. To this day, we still don't know who they were or why they did it. This is the story of the Brabant Killers, a brutal, mysterious gang that left 28 people dead and an entire country in fear. Were the Brabant Killers merely thieves? Were they terrorists? Or, as some people believe, were the perpetrators linked to the people who were supposedly investigating them? Welcome to History Snob. The spree of the Brabant Killers is Belgium's biggest cold case. It centers around a wave of deadly robberies, mostly against supermarkets. The gang was active between 1981 and 1985 in and around the province of Brabant in Belgium. In 20 suspected attacks, the killers claimed 28 lives, including children. These crimes were truly brazen. Many took place in broad daylight, with scores of witnesses. In almost all cases, the crimes were carried out by 3 men. Cases of this nature should be opened and shut within a short period of time. So how is it that these thugs have escaped justice for over 40 years? To understand, we must start from the beginning and look at the timeline of suspected attacks by the Brabant Killers. The first crime attributed to the Brabant Killers took place on the 31st of December 1981 in Ederbeek. A burglary took place at a gendarmerie barracks, a military building that houses members of gendarmerie, Belgium's paramilitary police force. Some automatic weapons, ammunition, and a car were stolen. Interestingly, some of these items were later found in a garage belonging to a former gendarme. But more of that when we discuss the suspects. The second crime that took place happened on the 13th of March 1982. This time in Dinant, 2 men stole a 10-gauge shotgun from a store. One of the men was described as being between the ages of 20 and 30, tall and blonde. The second man was described as looking to be about 50 years old with grey hair. The 2 men were then seen fleeing the scene. On May 10th in Brussels, an Austin Allegro was hijacked at gunpoint. A man approached the owner, who then forced him to hand over the keys. However, the car was almost immediately abandoned. The owner of the car reported that the man spoke fluent French, almost as if this was his first language. To her, he sounded very educated and affluent. That same day, another car was stolen, this time a Volkswagen Santana. On October 14th, the Brabant Killers made their first serious move in Maubeuge, France, just across the Belgian border. The robbery took place in a grocery store and some food and wine was stolen. Unfortunately, 2 police officers were shot and seriously wounded as they arrived on scene, just as the stolen goods were being loaded into a car. Here we encounter one of the strangest aspects of this gang. They often stole food and drink. When they did take cash, the amounts they made away with were never very impressive, especially considering the risk level of the crimes and the number of bodies left in their wake. A month after the first grocery store robbery, the gang robbed an arms dealer. 3 suspects were able to get away with 15 firearms, including submachine guns. 2 of the suspects were described as having auburn hair and the other black hair, a huge contrast to the previous witness accounts. This time, the gang's attack claimed a mortal victim, a police officer. The gang struck next on the 23rd of December in Brazil, and this was one of their strangest crimes. This time, they hit a restaurant, and they didn't take any cash or weapons. Instead, they stole only coffee and wine, but they killed for it, and cruelly. The body of a restaurant employee was later discovered by his son, his remains showing signs of torture. This is another thing to consider if you're trying to make sense of these attacks. Many of them are completely random and nonsensical, and increasingly they came to involve violence that was totally unnecessary. On January 9, 1983, the Brabant Killers carried out another seemingly random attack. The body of a taxi driver, Angelo Constantine, was found inside a suitcase in the trunk of his own car. A month later, the gang resumed their attacks on supermarkets. 3 masked suspects stole less than $18,000 in a raid on a busy store. Several people were injured, but luckily no one was killed. This time, one of the suspects was described as being North African with an afro hairstyle, and one of the others was seen wearing a balaclava. After this incident, the killers left behind an Audi with bullet holes from the attack. The Audi was taken to a garage for repairs, but the killers broke in and stole it back, presumably because it contained some evidence that might help identify them. But how did they even know where the car was? This is another curious element of this case. Evidence that could point to the killers has a mysterious tendency to disappear. This gang seems to have had very good intelligence. Suspiciously good. On September 10th, 2 men robbed a textile factory and stole 7 bulletproof jackets. Unfortunately, an employee was killed and his wife severely injured. Interestingly, the factory had very recently started manufacturing those types of jackets for police use, and this was not a widely known fact. This detail may provide an important clue as to the identity of at least one of the killers. Surprisingly, after their very busy 1983 murder/robbery spree, the gang took a year-long hiatus. People started to think that the Brabant killings were over, but unfortunately, the worst was yet to come. The killers returned in 1985, seemingly more violent and deranged than ever. On September 25th of that year, they viciously attacked 2 grocery stores within the span of an hour, killing 8 people in total. The gang's final and most heartless attack came on November 9th, 1985 at the Delhaize supermarket in Ulst. This is the same attack that claimed the life of David's father. It began with the gang committing perhaps their most horrifying act to date. As the 3 killers were heading into the store, a family of 4 was on its way out. For absolutely no reason, the gang shot and killed the mother, father, and daughter on the spot. The son managed to run back into the store. Though he would survive, he was severely wounded by a bullet to his hip. 8 lives would be claimed in this final attack, which netted the killers less than $25,000. Survivors reported that the killers were especially unhinged on this occasion, roaring at customers in the supermarket, taunting them, and even laughing as they fired indiscriminately at innocent people. The robbers didn't leave the scene right away. They had a brief shootout with police in the parking lot before speeding away. The gendarmes pursued them for a couple of kilometers, but the 3 killers slipped away again, this time for good. One last point before we take a look at suspects and theories. In November of 1986, a cache of weapons and other items used by the Brabant Killers in their crime spree was discovered in a canal. Interestingly, the canal had been searched the year before and nothing had been found. Okay, so let's look at the theories. The first theory is that the Brabant Killers were part of a far-right paramilitary group. There were several of these active in Belgium at the time, and some theorized they were even armed by NATO. Some evidence that supports this theory includes the fact that the group often used military-grade weapons, and investigators thought their tactics suggested the killers were trained fighters. They certainly weren't afraid to get into a shooting match. In this case, the motive would be to create chaos and instability for some kind of political benefit. There's no hard evidence supporting this, but some of the more serious suspects ran in the same circles, as we'll see. The second theory is that the killers were rogue gendarmerie or state security agents. This theory suggests that members of the military police called the gendarmerie or state security services were involved either directly or indirectly. You'll recall that some weapons that went missing from the gendarmes' barracks in Edderbeek were later used in the attacks. Also, you'll recall the bulletproof jackets that were stolen from the factory. It seems unlikely that anyone outside of the gendarmes could have known that they were being made there. Some witnesses to the attacks also claim that the killers flashed badges. One man in particular, he was a former gendarmes officer, career criminal, and neo-Nazi. His name was Madani Bohush. He ran a criminal gang and was convicted of multiple murders. His connections to both police and far-right paramilitary groups obviously made him a great suspect. But most interesting of all, some of the missing weapons from the gendarmerie were later found in a garage that he owned. But Madani Bohush died without ever being charged with any of the crimes, and the evidence remains circumstantial. The third theory is organized crime or an underworld hit squad. This theory suggests that the killings were committed by an unknown criminal gang for profit or vengeance, and possibly involved in smuggling or arms dealing. Some evidence to support this include the fact that several attacks involved theft of money, weapons, and bulletproof vests. Another piece of evidence includes the fact that the gang seemed to target small sums of money, which some suggest could be linked to laundering operations or a deeper criminal enterprise. However, the brutality of the murders was excessive even by underworld standards, and the financial gains were relatively small. The fourth theory is that they were simply psychotic serial killers. This theory suggests that the gang was driven by a desire and taste for violence, and not by politics or profit. Some of the crimes involved extreme cruelty, especially in the Ulster attack, where children were targeted seemingly without being provoked. Another piece includes the fact that witnesses at several scenes described bizarre behavior, such as laughing while shooting or shouting theatrically. However, people believe that the logistical coordination and tactical discipline argued against random psychopaths. It seemed too calculated for impulsive killers. The next theory is that this was an inside job or deep state sabotage. This theory suggests that the murders were part of a strategy of tension to destabilize Belgium or cover up the other state-related operations. Some evidence to support this include the fact that the killers were never caught despite a huge manhunt, the fact that evidence was repeatedly lost or destroyed by police. The last theory is that it was a failed blackmail or diversion operation. This theory suggests that the attacks were intended to coerce or distract, maybe targeting the Delhaize chain, which was hit multiple times, possibly as blackmail or to mask another agenda. The biggest piece of evidence to support this is that the Delhaize chain was attacked repeatedly, which raises suspicion. There's also the randomness of the items that were taken, like the fact that the gang stole wine and coffee. That may suggest a symbolic message rather than a plain robbery. However, no blackmail letters or demands were ever confirmed. One of the very first breaks in the case occurred in 2014, 32 years after the crimes, when Michel Liebert was taken into custody in relation to the murders. Liebert had once been second in command of a right-wing terrorist group called the Westland New Post. The WNP had specific orders to attack immigrant cafes and shops. They later stated that they were encouraged to carry out random attacks by NATO. These attacks, along with the attacks by the Brabant Killers, were allegedly part of a so-called stay-behind operation to fight communism in Europe. But the truth of these claims remains unknown. Liebert was eventually released by authorities. Then came the deathbed confession. The brother of a retired policeman in Aalst came forward in early 2017, stating that his brother confessed 2 years prior to being ringleader of the gang. The suspect, Christian Bankowski, who had been dismissed from an elite police unit prior to the crime spree. Shockingly, one of his girlfriends had enraged him by saying he resembled one of the composite sketches that was put together after a Brabant attack. A DNA sample and fingerprints were taken from Bankowski, but unfortunately came up as negative, eliminating him as a suspect. But why would he lie about it? Many people, including some of the victims, were very optimistic about the newly revealed information, as it had been the first real information they had to go on in over 30 years. In 2020, the BBC released a photo of a suspect believed to be involved in the case. This photo was sent anonymously in 1986 to police who were investigating the case. But in 2024, the Belgian authorities decided to officially close the investigation after nearly 40 years. At this point, it seems we're unlikely ever to know the true identity of the Brabant Killers. That's all for this video. What do you think of these crimes? Do you think it was a ruthless gang of serial killers killing for fun? Or do you think it was part of a bigger conspiracy? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to History Snob for more cool historical content. Thanks for watching.